Number one, why is very hard for you, me and you to surrender to God 100%. Number one is desire for control. We as a human being, we don't need to lose that control. We we always fight to control because when you go to God, you surrender. That means you are losing your control. That you cannot make your own decision. That you cannot plan for your own plans. You cannot come up with your own future plans which you like to do. Total surrender, surrendering to God require um, releasing your desire, allowing God to take control, God to come with a plan for you. So that is number one thing which make people to refuse to surrender. Even if we can say to surrender to God is very easy to say, but when it comes to the reality, is very challenging. Trusting in His plan, that is a total surrender. You allow God to come up with His own plan. Losing your control can feel uncomfortable or even frightening for some people. You lose control. That is number one. That you are desiring losing your control. Desire to control. We always look to control. I want to control. Even in our house, we want to control. We want to control our family. We want to control our children. We want you losing a control is very challenging. So when we come as a Christians, God is requesting to total surrender. Number two, why it is very hard to surrender. Trusting issue. Because total surrender require to trust, and especially when you are trusting to somebody who you cannot see, somebody who you cannot do conversation face to face. You are doing by faith. So that is number two things which make very hard people to surrender to God, to allow God to take control. Number one is desire to control. We always look to control. We don't want to lose that control. Number two is trusting issue. You want to trust somebody who you can see, somebody who you can do conversation. But we as a Christians, when we read the Bible, we see great miracles which God did. So we need a faith to believe what God did in the past, He can do even in the present time, even in the future. So that's the issue for you and me, that we have to conquer the trusting issue. We have to trust God even though we cannot touch, even though we cannot see, even though we cannot do the face-to-face conversation. We have to believe in Him. Number three, losing sometimes is hard to trust because you will lose the word attachment and desires. God will change you. So the things which you used to like, the thing which you used to love, the thing which you used to do, when you surrender to God, that means you are leaving them aside. You are leaving, you are going to another direction. So it's very, sometimes when you come now to that point of surrender, you feel how I used to do this. I used to drink this. I used to eat this. Now going to God, that means I'm going to lose everything. I'm going to change my life. That's number three, which make people hard to surrender to God. Also, and number four is fear of what God might ask. That you think maybe God will ask you to do something which you don't like. Let's say to myself, let me just give you an example. Sometimes when I come to say, God, I surrender completely. I want you to take over, to take control. The only fear which comes is to go back to Africa. Go back to Africa. That is the only fear which, when I surrender, I know when I surrender to God 100%, maybe God will ask me now to go back to Africa. That has been, and I'm sure even you have something which if you surrender to God, God might ask you to do something which you never like, and even you don't want to do it. So those are things which make people not to agree, to accept, to surrender to God. So when you read the Bible, if you read Genesis 22, verse 1 to 19, you will see how Abraham was willing to sacrifice his son. That is a total surrender, trusting God's plan. You trust God, even though you don't see, even though you don't understand, even though you cannot question, but you total surrender require that even if God is asking to do something which is no human being has never done, you have to surrender. That is total surrender. Trusting God's plan. Surrendering to God involved trusting Him even when we don't understand His plan. Like Abraham, willingness to sacrifice Isaac. He was willing to do something which no human being had never done. That is total surrender. That you trust in God's plan. Number two, obedience to God's commands. If you want to go to that point of total surrender, you have to obey God 100%. Total surrender requires obedience to God's command, even when they go against your desire or social norms. That is total surrender. Obedience to God's command. When God has said you have to move from Haran, you have to move from Mesopotamia to go to another country, you have to obey. You have to do the sacrifice. You are required to sacrifice your son. You have to obey. So total surrender, it requires to obey God's 100%, to listen what God have said, and you do what God have said. Like Noah, when God asked him to build Noah obeyed. Noah obeyed God's command to build an ark to prepare for the preparation for the flood. Despite of many people who were there who refused even to listen to the message, but he did 120 years building, investing for something which has never happened. Just putting your effort, putting your mind, putting your money, instead of taking your children to do, maybe to go for school, doing the investment, doing something which is going to be beneficial for your family, you are doing something which no human being has never done. That is obeying God's commands, even if you don't understand why, even if it goes against, contrary to your society norms. Number three, letting God of control. You let God to take control. These people we read from the Bible, like Abraham and the other guys like Moses and many of them, they let God to take control. Even if most of them, they didn't know what God had planned for them, but they trusted, obeyed, and surrendered to God and remaining waiting God directions. Surrendering to God means letting go of your needs to control of your life. Let go of control, the spirit of controlling, the spirit of making decisions by your own. It has to go. You have to allow God to take control. You listen from Him. You surrender to him. Like when Jesus was in Gethsemane, when he prayed, when he was always he was ready, to be crucified, but the temptation was so hard. But he said at the end that your will, your will. God, he surrendered to allow the will of God to be done. That is total surrender. That thing which we always fight, it has to come to the point of let our control to go. You allow God, you sit down, you wake up in the morning, you allow God to lead you, to guide you, to instruct you, to inform you. Total surrender requires all human beings to live according to God's commandment, to live according to God's directions. And most we as Christians, sometimes we don't see the power of God. We don't experience the miracles in our life because we have not come to that point of surrendering. You will not see the power of God. You will not enjoy your Christian life if you will not come to that point of total surrender. You will see, you will read miracles from the Bible, but it will never come to you because it requires us, you and me, to surrender to God, to let God guide, to let God lead, to let God direct you, either to go left or right, either to go forward or back. You have to allow God to take control. You have to commit to God 100%. Surrendering to God involved a commitment to serve him and advance his kingdom, setting aside personal ambitions, commitment to God's service and kingdom. That you surrender to God and you live because of him, you eat because of him, you sleep because of him, everything you do because of him. That is total surrender. If you cannot come to that point, commitment to God, surrendering to God, let go of your control, obedience to God's commands, trusting in God's plan, you cannot say you are surrendered. You are surrendered to God. If you want to be surrendered to God, total surrender, you have to trust in God's plans. You have to be obedient to God's commands. You have to let go of your control. You have to lose your control to let him control. You have to depend on God for provision and guidance. You have to come to that point. Like Exodus, we read when the Israelites were in the wilderness, they depended from God. Where to get food, how to get water. Everything was just dependence from God. So we have to come. Total surrender. Surrender acknowledges our dependence to God for all our needs and guidance, rather than relying solely on our own strength and wisdom. We have to trust Him and surrender, depend on God in everything. And the commitment to God's service and the kingdom. Those are things which I wanted it tonight to remind you that if we need to see the power of God in our life, we have to accept God to take control. And so I will give you this opportunity. If you have something to add or question, then Sister Jess will take over. Thank you.